The courtroom was suffocatingly silent. A heavy, pressing kind of silence that made every breath feel deliberate, every movement amplified. The wooden benches were packed with people, some spectators, some officials, but all eyes were fixated on the man at the center of it all. Jack sat in his wheelchair, his posture stiff, his face unreadable. Dressed in his military uniform, his chest adorned with medals, he looked every bit the soldier he had once been. But today, he wasn't here as a decorated war hero. He was here as a man fighting for his family. At his side sat Hunter, a German shepherd with sharp, intelligent eyes. To the untrained eye, he was just another military working dog, well-trained, disciplined, and alert. But to Jack, he was much more than that. He was his partner, his protector, his lifeline. Jack's fingers tightened around Hunter's leash as the judge cleared his throat, his expression firm yet unreadable. "Mr. Carter," the judge began, his voice echoing in the large chamber, "this may be your last opportunity to speak before a decision is made." Jack swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders. The army had made its decision. Hunter was to be reassigned, deemed government property, needed for another mission. After everything they had been through together, after all the times Hunter had saved his life, this was how it ended? Like a cold, impersonal transaction? Jack's jaw clenched, his grip on the leash tightening as he fought to steady his voice. "Your Honor," he started, the raw emotion barely concealed beneath his words, "Hunter isn't just a military asset. He's not just a piece of equipment to be reassigned at will." He glanced down at the dog, who sat quietly beside him, unwavering in his presence. "He saved my life. More times than I can count. And not just on the battlefield." Jack's voice wavered for a brief second before he steadied himself. "When I came home, when I couldn't even face myself in the mirror, Hunter was there. He kept me going. He's not just a dog. He's my family." The room remained eerily still. Some spectators shifted in their seats, dabbing at their eyes. Others exchanged looks of silent outrage. The judge remained impassive, his gaze fixed on Jack, weighing his words carefully. And then, before the judge could respond, Hunter moved. And everything changed. Jack took a deep breath, steadying himself as the judge's gaze bore into him. He had faced enemy fire, survived ambushes, and endured the horrors of war. But standing here, pleading for Hunter, felt like the hardest battle he had ever fought. He gripped the leash tighter, his knuckles white, as he forced himself to speak. "Your Honor," he said again, his voice stronger now, filled with conviction. "Hunter isn't just a tool for the military. He's not something you can repurpose and send back into combat like a piece of equipment." He looked down at the German shepherd sitting beside him, always calm, always alert. "He's a soldier, just like me. And he deserves better than this." Jack let out a slow breath, his chest tightening. Memories crashed over him, moments from the battlefield that still haunted his nights. "I remember the first time he saved my life," Jack continued, his voice quieter now, as if he were speaking more to himself than the judge. "We were pinned down, caught in an ambush. I didn't see the sniper, but Hunter did. He knocked me down just as the bullet should have hit me. That was the first time he saved me, but it wasn't the last." He paused, glancing at the judge, trying to gauge his reaction. But the man's face remained unreadable. Jack clenched his jaw. "Fine. He would make them understand. When I came home, things weren't the same. The war didn't end just because I left the battlefield. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't function. Every loud noise felt like another explosion. Every shadow felt like another enemy." His fingers twitched slightly against the leash, the weight of his words pressing down on him. "I was drowning," he admitted. "And no one could pull me out." Jack swallowed hard, his throat dry. "No one except Hunter." A hush fell over the courtroom. Even those who had entered the room indifferent now seemed to be leaning forward, caught up in his words. "He wasn't just a service dog. He was my anchor. the only thing that kept me going when I didn't want to go on." Jack turned to Hunter, who sat there patiently, his sharp eyes locked onto his handler. His partner. His family. "I owe him my life," Jack finished, his voice barely above a whisper. "So how can I just let him go?" Silence hung thick in the air. Somewhere in the audience, someone sniffled. Others sat frozen, their expressions shifting from skepticism to something closer to understanding. The judge, however, remained still. Then, just as Jack thought he might have finally reached him, Hunter's ears perked up. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Jack felt it before he even heard it. Something was wrong. A low, guttural growl rumbled in Hunter's chest, breaking the heavy silence in the courtroom. Jack felt it before he even heard it. The tension in Hunter's body was unmistakable, every muscle coiled, his ears pinned back, his sharp gaze locked onto something unseen. Jack's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just random behavior. Hunter had done this before, too many times. On the battlefield, his instincts had meant the difference between life and death. And now, in this quiet, controlled courtroom, Hunter was reacting the same way. A ripple of unease passed through the room. People shifted in their seats, whispering nervously. "What's wrong with the dog?" someone murmured from the back. Jack gripped the leash tighter, his heartbeat quickening. "He's not just barking," Jack said, his voice tense. "He only acts like this when there's danger." The judge frowned, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Mr. Carter," he said sternly, "control your dog or I will." Jack didn't let him finish. "Hunter isn't misbehaving," he interrupted, his voice sharp with urgency. "He's trained to detect threats, explosives, ambushes, things no one else can see." A nervous murmur spread through the spectators. Jack barely heard them. His entire focus was on Hunter. The German Shepherd's stance had changed, his head lowered, his body tense like a spring wound too tight. And then, just as suddenly as he had started barking, he stopped. The silence was deafening. Every hair on Jack's arms stood on end. He had seen this before. Too many times. Hunter wasn't just sensing danger. He was pinpointing it. Jack followed the dog's gaze, his eyes landing on the large wooden doors at the far end of the courtroom. Something was there. The murmurs in the room turned into hushed, panicked whispers. The judge's expression, once impatient, now showed a flicker of uncertainty. The bailiffs exchanged wary glances, their hands resting near their holsters. Jack swallowed hard. His body tensed, instincts screaming at him to prepare. Hunter's growl returned, deeper this time, vibrating through the floor like distant thunder. Something wasn't right. And whatever it was getting closer. The room held its breath. Hunter's growl deepened, a low and menacing rumble that sent chills through everyone in the courtroom. His sharp gaze remained locked on the heavy wooden doors at the far end of the room, his body rigid, every muscle coiled in anticipation. Jack gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, his pulse thundering in his ears. He had seen this before. Too many times. On the battlefield, moments before an ambush. Right before an IED was uncovered. Before everything went to hell. But this wasn't war. This was supposed to be a courtroom, a place of order and control. Yet the tension in the air was suffocating, thick with an unspoken dread that no one could explain. The judge shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tightening around the gavel. "Bailiffs," he ordered, his voice firm but laced with unease, "check the door." The two officers hesitated, exchanging glances before stepping forward cautiously. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a wary expression, rested his hand on the grip of his holstered weapon. "It's probably nothing," he muttered under his breath. Jack clenched his jaw. It was never nothing. Hunter didn't react to shadows or noises. He reacted to real threats. Jack's voice cut through the murmurs. "Listen to me," he said, his tone sharp with urgency. "Hunter doesn't make mistakes. If he's acting like this, something is wrong. The judge's eyes flickered with doubt. A bead of sweat rolled down the forehead of the smaller bailiff. Still, they pressed forward. Hunter's growls turned into sharp, clipped barks, his stance shifting lower, more aggressive. He was warning them. Jack tightened his grip on the leash, his knuckles white. The larger bailiff reached for the handle. A moment of hesitation. Then, the door creaked open. The hallway beyond was dimly lit, stretching into darkness. At first, nothing seemed out of place. But Hunter's barking only intensified. Jack's chest tightened. Something was there. Something they couldn't see. The larger bailiff took a cautious step forward, his hand resting near his weapon. The smaller one followed, his flashlight slicing through the shadows. A long pause. The beam of light swept across the hallway, revealing nothing but an empty corridor. "It's just," the smaller bailiff started to say. Then, a sharp metallic clang echoed down the hallway. The sound was distant, but unmistakable. A gasp rippled through the spectators. The judge gripped his gavel tighter. "What the hell was that?" the larger bailiff muttered. Jack's breath came fast. His gut twisted. His instinct screamed. Hunter's barking reached a fever pitch, his claws scraping against the polished floor. Jack's grip nearly slipped. He knew. He knew this feeling. Something was coming. And they weren't ready. The metallic clang echoed through the hallway, sending a ripple of unease through the courtroom. Every breath in the room seemed to catch. Hunter barked furiously, his body tense, his gaze locked on the now open door. Jack could feel the leash vibrating in his grip as Hunter strained forward, every muscle in his body coiled like a loaded spring. Something was there. Something was coming. The larger bailiff adjusted his stance, his hand now gripping his holstered weapon. The smaller one hesitated, his flashlight beam shaking slightly. It could be just a pipe or, the smaller bailiff started, but his voice wavered. He didn't believe his own words. No one in the room did. Jack's heart pounded against his ribs. His instincts screamed at him. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. Then, the door creaked open wider. A figure stepped forward. Slow, deliberate. A tall man, dressed in a dark coat with a hood pulled low over his face. His movements were measured, confident, too confident. As if he had all the time in the world. Jack's grip on Hunter's leash tightened. Something about this man sent every nerve in his body into high alert. Hunter's growl deepened, his teeth baring, his stance shifting lower in pure aggression. The bailiffs tensed, both now fully alert. "Sir," the larger one said, his voice strong but edged with caution, "identify yourself." The stranger didn't respond. He simply stood there, just beyond the reach of the dim hallway lights, his face obscured. And then, without a word, he took another step forward. Jack inhaled sharply. He didn't know why, but something about this man felt wrong. Not just dangerous. Not just threatening. Wrong. The room was frozen. The judge, who had been firm and composed moments ago, now seemed unsettled. His gavel hung loosely in his grip. Spectators shifted in their seats, exchanging nervous glances, whispering amongst themselves. The larger bailiff took another step toward the stranger, his hand now fully gripping his weapon. "I said identify yourself," he ordered, more forceful this time. Still, the man didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if amused by the situation. Then, he spoke. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." His voice was smooth. Calm. Too calm. It sent a chill through Jack's spine. Lies. Jack could hear it in the tone, the deliberate way the man spoke. It wasn't reassurance. It was something else. Something much, much worse. Jack's eyes flicked toward Hunter, who hadn't stopped growling, hadn't shifted his focus for even a second. Hunter knew. He always knew. Jack swallowed hard. The stranger took another slow step forward. And in that moment, Jack realized something terrifying. The man wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't afraid. Because he was in complete control. He was here for a reason. And that reason was Hunter. The room was frozen in shock. The two figures who had appeared behind the stranger stood motionless, their faces shadowed, their weapons glinting under the flickering lights. Hunter's growls filled the air, low and guttural, vibrating with pure instinctual warning. Jack tightened his grip on the leash, his heartbeat thundering in his chest. This wasn't just some stranger causing a disturbance. This was something much, much bigger. The larger bailiff stepped forward, his hand gripping his holstered weapon. "Sir, I'm giving you one last warning," he barked, his voice edged with tension. "Drop whatever you're holding, turn around, and leave this courtroom immediately." The stranger, still calm, still unnervingly collected, tilted his head slightly as if considering the request. Then, slowly, he smiled. "I don't think you understand," he said, his voice smooth as glass. "I'm not here to cause a scene." His gaze flicked toward Hunter. "I'm here for the dog." Jack's grip on the leash tightened so hard his knuckles turned white. He could barely process what he was hearing. "They don't own him," Jack spat, his voice filled with barely contained rage. "And neither do you." The stranger exhaled a quiet laugh. "No," he admitted. "But I know what he is. What he's capable of." His words sent a fresh wave of dread through Jack. How did this man know? Hunter wasn't just a trained military dog. Jack had always felt there was something more. Something different about him. But only Jack knew that. Didn't he? The tension in the room stretched to its breaking point. One of the armed figures behind the stranger shifted slightly, their grip tightening on their weapon. Hunter barked sharply in response, his body trembling with pent-up energy, ready to strike at any moment. Jack could barely breathe. The stranger's gaze locked onto him. "I don't want to make this difficult," he said, his voice quieter now, almost patient. "But whether you like it or not, we will be taking him." Jack's blood ran cold. No. Not a chance in hell. He straightened in his wheelchair, squaring his shoulders, refusing to show weakness. Hunter was his partner. His family. "You're not taking him," Jack said, his voice steel. The stranger studied him for a long moment. And then, for the first time, his expression changed. The smirk faded. His eyes darkened, his jaw tightening just slightly. He wasn't amused anymore. Jack could see it. This man wasn't used to being told no. The courtroom was completely silent. The judge, once a pillar of authority, now looked pale, unsure. Spectators clutched their belongings, some inching toward the exits, while others sat frozen in fear. Jack could feel the weight of every single person's gaze on him. But he didn't care. His only focus was Hunter. And the three people standing between them and freedom. The stranger exhaled slowly, like a man making a decision. "Fine," he murmured. "Have it your way." He turned slightly, signaling to the figures behind him. Then, in one fluid motion, he dropped the key. The small metallic object hit the floor with a sharp clink. And every light in the courtroom shut off. Darkness swallowed the room. A chorus of gasps and panicked whispers erupted from the spectators. Hunter barked furiously, the sound slicing through the black void like a warning shot. Jack's heart slammed against his ribs. He gripped the leash tighter, bracing himself for what was coming. And then, from somewhere in the darkness, a single, deliberate footstep echoed toward them. The sudden darkness was suffocating. A wave of panic rippled through the courtroom. Gasps, hurried whispers, the sound of chairs scraping against the floor, chaos was spreading. Jack's breathing quickened, his grip on Hunter's leash tightening like a lifeline. Then, A single, deliberate footstep echoed in the silence. Then another. Slow. Measured. Coming closer. Hunter erupted into a frenzy of barking, his growls deep and guttural, vibrating through the floor beneath Jack's wheelchair. Jack's mind raced. The lights hadn't just flickered off by accident. This was planned. The stranger had done this. Which meant whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be good. "Stay where you are," the larger bailiff barked into the darkness, his voice strained but commanding. A metallic click, a gun being unholstered. The smaller bailiff fumbled for his flashlight, his breathing sharp and uneven. A shaky beam of light cut through the darkness. But it barely reached the far end of the room. Jack clenched his jaw. He could feel the shift in the air. A presence. Lurking. Watching. Waiting. Hunter's barks turned to deep, warning growls. Jack had heard those growls before. Right before an attack. Right before hell broke loose. A shiver crawled down his spine. "Jack," the judge's voice called out in the dark, unsteady. "What is happening?" Jack didn't have an answer. Then, a third footstep. Closer this time. The flashlight beam wavered, catching a brief glimpse of movement. A figure. The stranger. Standing just beyond the light's reach. Too still. Too calm. Jack's gut twisted. The man was enjoying this. Drawing it out. A predator playing with its prey. Hunter snapped his teeth, his entire body rigid. Jack swallowed hard. He had no weapon. No backup. No plan. All he had was Hunter. A low chuckle echoed through the darkness. Smooth. Cold. "You feel it, don't you?" The stranger's voice carried through the room like a whisper of smoke. Jack gritted his teeth. Feel what? Another step. Another moment of unbearable silence. Then, the stranger's voice, closer now. "That this is just the beginning." Jack's fingers clenched around the leash. His pulse pounded against his skull. Enough. If this man thought he could walk in here and take Hunter, he was dead wrong. Jack forced himself to take a slow breath, steadying his voice. "I don't care who you are," he said, his tone ice. "But you're not leaving here with my dog." The stranger didn't move. Then, a soft, amused exhale. "Not today," he murmured. Hunter's ears flicked forward. A beat of silence. Then, the lights flickered back on. Blinding at first. Jack blinked hard, his vision adjusting. The courtroom was a mess of confusion. People standing, gripping their belongings, some halfway to the exits. The judge pale, frozen in place. The bailiffs on edge, weapons half raised, scanning the room. And the stranger. Gone. Jack's stomach dropped. Hunter was still on full alert, his growls rumbling low in his chest. Jack's eyes darted to the far end of the courtroom. The doors. Slightly open. Whoever they were. They had left. For now. Jack exhaled sharply, his muscles finally releasing their tension. But he knew. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The silence that followed was deafening. Jack's chest rose and fell in sharp, controlled breaths as his grip remained firm on Hunter's leash. The room was still reeling. People were whispering, exchanging nervous glances, some clutching their belongings as if holding on to something tangible would steady the chaos they had just witnessed. The judge, normally composed and in control, sat motionless, his fingers wrapped tightly around his gavel. One of the bailiffs finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Where the hell did they go? No one had an answer. Jack's eyes remained locked on the slightly open doors at the far end of the courtroom. They had walked out as easily as they had walked in, leaving behind nothing but confusion and unanswered questions. But Jack knew better. They weren't gone. Not really. Not permanently. Hunter sat rigid at his side, his ears still perked, his body coiled. He wasn't convinced the danger had passed. Neither was Jack. The judge cleared his throat, an attempt to regain order, though his voice wavered slightly. "This court is adjourned," he announced, but it lacked the usual authority. He wasn't dismissing a case. He was trying to dismiss the fear that hung thick in the air. People hesitated before moving. Some rushed for the exit, eager to be anywhere but here. Others lingered, whispering theories about who the men were, why they had come, and, most importantly, what they wanted with Hunter. Jack already knew the answer to that last question. Hunter wasn't just a military dog. He never had been. And those men? They knew exactly what made him special. Jack reached down, running his fingers gently through Hunter's fur. The dog finally looked up at him, eyes sharp, ears still alert, but his breathing slowing. "We're okay," Jack murmured, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince, Hunter or himself. The weight of what had just happened settled heavily on his shoulders. Who were those men? Why had they come now, of all times? And the most unsettling thought of all. If they were willing to show up in a courtroom, in broad daylight, in front of a judge and armed officers, what would they be willing to do in the dark? Jack exhaled slowly, steadying his thoughts. Whatever was coming, he would be ready. Because one thing was certain. This wasn't over.